Hi everybody, welcome back to the Intercooler podcast, episode 233, with Dan Prosser and Andrew Frankel, and a guest this week, Mr. Richard Tuthill of Tuthill. Are you still Tuthill Porsche, or is it just Tuthill these days?
Let's go with Tuthill for the moment.
Tuthill. Okay, saying it more. So, Richard, thank you for coming on. Now, things are quite exciting in your world, aren't they, at the moment? You stole the show, I think we can say.
I was there
at Car Week.
Yeah,
a few weeks ago.
Yeah, in Monterey.
With the extraordinary GT1 that you've developed, and of course it actually leaked online a few days before, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been quite a month following it, and of course the build up, as you can imagine, was fairly hectic our end. But yeah, what a response! Not massively surprised by it, but always humbled when you put something out there and everyone loves it.
Yeah,
I met someone came up to me, and he just missed the boat. Someone had just ordered the last one, and he'd gone up to you and you'd said terribly sorry, all gone.
You should have been there within the first 2 hours, then, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow, blimey.
I mean,
it's been quite a process actually to work out. We've been inundated with lovely inquiries from really great people, all of whom you would like to supply a car to, but we had to sort of be true to what we said, stick to 22 cars. We could have sold more, but I think it was such a wonderful position to be in, but it does create some problems.
So how do you decide on the number 22? Why not 42?
Well, I'm typically very reserved in what we do. So first of all, I have no ambition to build high volume cars. I really enjoy the process of developing and dreaming this stuff up with of course an amazing team around me. And actually, the original GT1 cars that were made by many manufacturers were, roughly speaking, around 20 cars because of the homologation need. Porsche made 22 of theirs, I believe. So, ironically, we decided to produce 33 911Ks. So maybe we should just do divisible by 11 and we'll be about right. So
44 for the next one.
There is some thought that goes into it.
shall we, just for anybody who, in the unlikely event, isn't familiar with Richard and with Tuthill, would it be a good idea, Richard, for you just to sort of tell us, A, what the business is now, and B, where it came from? Presumably it was your dad who started it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll go that way around. Actually, I'm sat at home with a dodgy tendon or two in my shoulder, but 100 meters from here is our original workshop. Dad is back working in his original workshop. He founded the business in the early 70s, and we've started off as a service workshop. His exploits, long distance rallying, be it VW Beetles or Porsche 911s, is fairly well documented. And I got involved in the business 20 years ago, plus or minus, only for one rally, I might add, which was the East African Safari Rally. And here we are today doing all sorts of wonderful things across any 911 platform. Is probably the easiest thing to say. So the team's been racing this weekend in Estoril. We've got a car on Modena Shenta. We've just finished 3 cars going across Morocco last week. We're gearing up for 20 cars in the Safari Rally in 2025.
Wow.
We're building 33 911Ks and now 22 GT1s. So life's pretty busy. And in amongst all of that, we run our ice driving program in Sweden every year, which is now 18 years old. So we do stuff and we don't think too much. We just get on. And yeah, we're pretty busy.
Have you ever done anything which didn't start with a 911?
I did. I did those Jaguar. Were they F-type rally cars?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I drove one of them.
Yeah. So that was funny. We built them, and then I did a little bit of testing, and then I think they were handed over to you lovely media types. That was an hilarious situation I got into myself, which I very quickly realised was the wrong thing to do. As did they, because they couldn't talk about who had built them because of our link with Porsche. So, no, the reality is, yeah, we've done the odd 9146. We still do 356s quite regularly. I love them. and the odd 928 has slipped through the net. But no, let's stick to something we're still learning about, and that's of course the 911.
So the facility really has changed over the years. You're near Banbury, aren't you? I remember coming up there 10, 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and fairly sort of modest workshops. And I remember your office space was in a fairly gloomy room, your desk piled high with stacks of paper, all that sort of stuff. But nowadays, you've got these two beautiful and enormous, you'll call them sheds, they're not sheds. I think one's for road cars, one's for motorsport stuff.
Yeah, we've recently split the two distinct areas of business, and in fact, two is becoming three, so it's 2.5 now. We've just started the latest renovation, actually, of the original building, and that really is just to keep up with the volume of work that we're involved in, and of course, we all want to work in lovely places these days, and it's important to have the right environment to attract the talent who make all this stuff happen. So there's a whole load of good reasons why we've built a couple of nice sheds.
They're wonderful. And I mean, when you sort of took the reins of Tuthill, the company, was it always your plan to grow it this way, or has it happened quite organically, just steadily over time?
It's very, very organic. It has been, and I don't know whether I'm going to say it anyway. I'm sure you can edit it out, but I've thrown so much shit at the wall that some of it's stuck. So
that's one way, isn't it?
In the beginning, the answer to every question was yes, but I'd said that before I'd even listened to the question. Hence, I ended up building a couple of Jaguars. My point is, I love projects. I love working with all sorts of wonderful people, and of course, as of late, we are starting to sort of home in on what it is we want to do. We've got to a phase now in the business where it's a certain size, so there has to be a little bit more planning. But the reality is, I've for the last 20 years turned up at work every morning at 8 o'clock, if not a little bit earlier, and just charged around the place. The result is what we're looking at today. So there's no secret. It's just hard work, great people, and getting stuck in. But it is becoming a little bit more refined now. We have a bit more of an idea of where I want to head and what we want to do, but it still involves every single discipline you can imagine.
Yeah.
Are you happy with the size you are now, which is very different to? I mean, I can remember came out. Do you remember you once sold me a 2.7 RS replica?
I have repeated that story a million times when you picked it up, and I think you rang me, obviously hands-free, from the M40. You said, "What have you done to the car?" And all I had done is actually got you sat in the right position. That was the key thing that made you love that car a little bit more.
You changed the steering wheel and you put a spacer on it.
Yeah, and I think I might have lowered your seat, but either way, yeah. Am I happy with where we're at? Look, I'm delighted with what we're doing. We're having a lot of fun. There's 90 people come to work every morning.
Wow.
And that's quite significant.
What would that number have been 10 years ago?
Yeah, 20, 30 people.
Sure.
I've no ambition to have a huge business, but by default, there's more people around than there ever used to be. And it's a game in itself to manage that number of people and that many projects. But we are forced into a position where we grow because we create products that people like, and whether it's ice driving or safari rallying or driving at the 2 Litre Cup, the demand is there, and as long as we continue to do what we do, and we won 2 championships yesterday, so we can't be doing that badly with it all. I think you just go with the flow. I think that's how I've ended up where I've ended up. There's no ambition to grow, but we're at a certain size, and I think it's quite a nice size now.
But you're now, you would have been struck as I was when you wandered around the Quail and you saw all those different companies and how much they owed to the existence of the 911 in the first place. There are so many, and now you are kind of joining them Does that sort of does that daunt you at all? Do you regard it as a challenge that you're more than happy to rise to? Is it an irrelevance to you? How do you sort of feel about moving into that area now with the GT1?
Well, I would say the first thing I would say is that thank God we're able to base a business around what Porsche have done, because they still inspire us today. What they did in the 60s and 70s, and obviously through to current day, is extraordinary. If you pick out one manufacturer who you would love to work on their cars, it has to be Porsche. And the 911 is, I don't know whether one would ever say the most iconic car of all time, but its evolution is just staggering. So firstly, we're indebted to everything they've ever done, and continue to be inspired by everything they've done. And in case of what we're up to now, the big change with the GT1 is it's our first non-Porsche shape. The 911K, which is in many ways an equally impressive car with its weight and its ability to rev to 11,000 RPM, it's still a standard Porsche 911 ST shape, which you recognise. So
sure.
I think this, the one thing I would caution anyone in is, once you start styling, once you start playing with shapes, you really have to get it right. And the way I've managed to bring that talent into our business is through a chap called Florian Flatau, who I believe is perhaps the greatest designer with some Porsche heritage himself. He produces amazing shapes. I think it's a really tricky area, and I don't take it lightly. It's a risk. We're going up against, as you say, there was many people across all manufacturers, I might add, but the obvious name to mention at this point is Singer, who are just the most fantastic bunch of guys out there. Good friends with them. I've worked with them on projects, as you're both aware, in the past. I often say that the reason we were stood on that field, or that golf course, I should say, Philip will bollock me if I say it's a field, the golf course, was because Singer have created a market for across all manufacturers. So let's be honest, they are the reason we're stood in California on that day, and they've created a market that didn't exist. So hats off to them, but it's a big challenge to design, create, and build a car that will live up to the standards that have been set.
So I remember, Richard, I came up several years ago to drive, or maybe a couple of years ago, to drive a 914 that you'd built for a client with a 2.7 RS engine. Very cool car.
Cool car.
Loved it. And on that day, you said to me, we've got an awful lot going on the road car side. You said, we've got a project coming that's 993 based, and it's going to be a bit of a game changer. You couldn't tell me any more than that. And maybe a year later or something, you unveiled the 911K, and I thought, goodness me, he wasn't lying. This is extraordinary. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that car in a moment. But then this summer, you unveiled the GT1, and clearly that's the car you were really talking about, because it's a whole new world for, well, not just for Tuthill, but for that whole scene as a whole. Well, yeah,
I'm not really sure how to react to that, but for the one thing, the 993 fascination has been around a long time for me. I've always felt that it was a much better car than the 964, for obvious reasons. I mean, 964 was a very short development span, and it was almost an in-between car. 993, I believe, had something like 14 years of development. I think the 993 RS is potentially the greatest car that Porsche ever built.
Please don't say that. I sold one.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, we could probably compare stories about cars we've sold that we shouldn't have done, but I genuinely think it's a fantastic thing. It was underpowered, but it was wonderful to drive. And so I think I always had this ambition to do some 993s. We built a series of 15 SCRS shaped 993s. That was actually our first 993 project.
Yeah.
And they're an unbelievably good car. As ever, I think they're quite simple. They do a brilliant job, and they're such a good car to drive on the road. So the actual reality, the reason we did something that was inspired by the GT1 was because a client walked in the door, lovely chap, Elliot, walked in the door and said, should we make some cars inspired by these wonderful things? He owns 2 original cars. So that was how we ended up with the GT1.
Wow.
And actually, it's a similar story with the 911K. Philip Kadori, who's become a great mate, and I got chatting during lockdown, and I'd always wanted to build a lightweight car. Philip's always up for a challenge, and so we set about a project together. But these things are very, very organic. So if you were to say to me, Richard, what's next? The answer is I don't know.
Can I ask you something very specific about the 911K, which has fascinated me since the moment I heard of its existence? How do you get an air-cooled engine to spin to 11,000 RPM reliably when it was never, ever originally designed to do anything close to that?
I guess the first question one might ask yourself is, how do you get any engine to spin to 11,000 RPM, whether it's a flat 6 or otherwise? The reality is it is not easy, and it's very specific to that engine, that stroke, that bore size. So when engines are revving to such high RPM, you've got a inertia that is in the mechanical components. So by default, they have to be lighter, and you have to restrict certain speeds, because if you've got a big piston that's going up and down, you need to have that controlled. And of course, you've got, in our case, we've got 4 valve heads, which means you can have 4 valves, not 2. That means you can have 4 lighter valves rather than 2 heavier valves. So there's a massive amount of work that goes into it. It's not easy. But
when Porsche did that,
challenges.
when Porsche did that, and they decided that for racing they needed a 4-valve head, they water cooled it, because I presume there wasn't enough space in that head to cool it sufficiently just using air, and you appear to have found a way around that.
Well, you're right. So in any engine, the thing that delivers power, ultimately you can call that heat. So ultimately your restriction in most engines is the cylinder head temperature. I know, for example, I was privy to some testing with the DLS, and that was a limiting factor. I mean, that's an extraordinary engine. Again, 4-valve. They were the first to do that with a 4-litre engine and 500 horsepower. That revs to 9 or 9.5, I can't remember. To get to 11, if you had 500 horsepower, 11,000 RPM, I suspect you'd have a bigger problem. But the 911K is only 850 kilos. I've got 350 horsepower. And to quote something that Walter Roll once said, Porsche horsepowers are different to other horsepowers.
It's true.
So these days, if we talk about 350 horsepower, I mean, you can get that out of a 3.8 or a 4-litre 2-valve engine. But what you can't get is 11,000, and what you can't get is a driving characteristic which is like nothing you've ever experienced. If you then throw that at an 850 kilo car, of course you don't need any more power. In fact, you could argue you've already got too much. So it's a heat management situation, and that's not something we struggle with. That is not the problem that we've faced. We've faced a few other challenges, all of which are resolved, and the engine's working brilliantly. But because we've got only 350 horsepower, heat is not a problem.
And actually, yeah, that's right. The point of that engine in that car is not outright power. You would have done something quite different if you wanted a headline power figure. It's about the engine character, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's a philosophy that I would say is part of everything I do. I'm not really interested in power, because that doesn't necessarily translate to a brilliant driving experience. If I go back to my 993 RS comment, and then yes, I would agree that was underpowered, but an underpowered car allows you to wring its neck, have an extraordinary driving experience, and you're better off. I drove the Rimac Navara.
Did you?
the other day. That's something I bet you never thought I'd say.
And
1900 horsepower, I think.
Yeah.
Electric, staggering, unbelievably cool thing to go and drive. Honestly, just extraordinary piece of engineering. So I've nothing other than praise to say about something like that.
But do you want one? Do you want one?
I think there's a price point that's going to cause me a challenge, and how practical it is in real world, I don't know. But that to one side, what a fantastic car. You're only really aware of its weight when you start pushing, and I was on the road from up to Ronda. You'll know it well, I'm sure.
I do.
Up near the Ascari Club, and what a fantastic thing. But I think on the whole, my mission in life is to create cars that drive on, and you'll both be aware of this, B roads really. I want road cars, and I think there's so many beautiful cars out there. They really are beautiful, but I would often challenge whether they drive in a manner that I would be happy with, and so that remains my mission. And power doesn't sit very high on my hit list.
So what should those 22 lucky customers expect from their GT1s?
Well, I make no secret the fact that I'm testing with a water-cooled engine, and that's really so that I can do all my chassis testing quickly and efficiently. So I'm using a GT4 RS engine, which has probably got 450, 500 horsepower, let's say. My ambition is to produce a air-cooled, naturally aspirated engine, which will be reasonably high revving. It won't be 11,000, and that ought to have 500-600 horsepower. And we're offering a turbo variant, again, not with crazy power. 600 horsepower ought to be plenty. The reason I want to actually use a turbo, which I was not really planning on, was, again, I drove another car which I found extraordinary, a 296 GTB. I think is the right thing.
Yeah.
And we're all supposed to think turbo engines are a bit dull, but again, that was an extraordinary engine, made lovely noises, and of course, with a turbo engine, you have very little air intake, which is good for a GT car. And if I'm being true to the inspiration, then the car was a twin turbo air-cooled engine, but with water-cooled heads. So we're developing a couple of engines. We're not looking to break any records, but we do believe we can produce a brilliant 4-litre air-cooled engine with more power than anyone's ever achieved. And I think that will be relevant to this car.
It is a testament, really, to your business that 22 people have come forward in no time at all and snapped up these cars, even though it is a totally different thing for Tuthill, even though you actually don't have direct experience of that sort of car at that sort of money. But people clearly have faith in the work that you've done in the past and have the confidence to put their money down.
Look, on the one hand, it's quite shocking, and I take it very, very seriously, as you can imagine. The interesting thing is, we're stood, Andrew and I were stood on that white plinth in the baking sunshine that day. And so, of course, there's more and more people know who we are, which is lovely. Those that don't know, once they understand who we are, then it gives them a different take on the decision they might have just made. So there are so many people doing such wonderful work. A lot of them are less than 10 years old. We're 50 years old. And so there's not much we haven't done. And if I'm being really honest, we actually do more than anyone in the world in this scene. So as I've just told you, we've won race championships, we've been to Morocco, and we've got a car driving in Italy. That's all in the same week.
Yeah.
Every single week, somewhere in the world, we're active. So when these people get introduced to it, they look at our history, and I think, in a very nice way, they're reassured that we're not another pop-up with a story that has not been manufactured, but it's certainly something which is young, and nothing wrong with that. But we have done a few things, and so I think I think they're in safe hands.
That's a great answer, Richard. And actually, the sort of motorsport background should give people a lot of confidence. You build cars for the toughest events on the planet, so you build a tough car, and that goes through everything that you do. Now, I just wonder though, your sort of typical customer who has a 911 SC or a 3.2, and they come to you and they want a little bit of chassis tuning or a touch more power. Do they now need to worry that Tuthill isn't for them?
No, that's a great question. So, at a certain point, you've got to think about who you are and what you want to be doing. But I still see all our info at emails. So on the weekend, lovely inquiry from a chap who's got some cracked cylinder head studs almost for sure on his 3.2. So I read that email, and now I haven't replied, but I'm a bit restricted to my typing at the moment. But I'm very much in touch with who we are, where we've come from, and our service department, which is, bearing in mind our business was a service workshop, is much smaller than it was. But there's lots of reasons for that. I'm still interested in adjusting someone's 915 gear shift or rebuilding a 3.2 with cracked head studs. There's no reason why we shouldn't do. And I think the reality is, you take a job on, whether it's an MOT or a 3.2 engine rebuild, and one thing leads to another. And a lot of great people own these cars. So no, I think we've got to stay true to who we are, and try and help as many people as we can in whatever way with their Porsches.
Can I ask how it works with Porsche itself? There are now so many companies that earn their livings from modifying Porsches. Obviously, we know you, and we've known you for years, and your credentials and your company's history absolutely speak for themselves. But that's not the same for everybody out there who might be doing this. And you're now creating the GT1, which has a lot of Porsche componentry, but an awful lot of Tuthill componentry too. Is the factory happy to let you get on? When do you get to a stage when you're not comfortable putting a Porsche badge on it, or when does the factory get to the stage when they're not comfortable with you putting a Porsche badge on something? How does that relationship work?
Well, in the brilliant question, and something that's very, very live and hot topic as we sit here, and I'm going to sound really naive now, but bear with me. I don't know how it works. I am not wishing in any way to pretend to be Porsche. I am looking forward to visiting the factory for the first time in middle of November.
Gosh, you've never been before?
No. I went to actually, that's not quite true. I went to the Trans-Siberia launch because I did Moscow to Mongolia with Porsche. So we went to the Cayenne factory. But I think it's a very, very grey area. I, with my naive hat on, would love to think, and in fact I do solidly think, that everything that's going on in this space, as long as it's been done well, is introducing people to the Porsche brand. The guys who are buying a GT1 from me or a 911K will also buy the latest GT3 or the latest whatever it might be. So I think it doesn't take sales away from them. I would love to think, in fact, it keeps their brand history very, 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 very well known and actually introduced to a new audience. So there are times when Porsche have to explain to their audience what is a Porsche and what is not, and they've done that. They did that with the Singer ACS, which we were a big part of course. So I don't take that challenge lightly, and I am actively looking at the implications. But I'm a brilliant ambassador for Porsche, even though I say so myself. I love everything they've done and that they're doing. We're a great client. We buy hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of Porsche parts. We keep hundreds, thousands of Porsches on the road, and I introduce people who would never drive a 911 to 911s for the very first time, and in some cases I take them across Africa. I would love to have a brilliant relationship with the best car manufacturer in the world. This story probably has a next chapter, but in any case, it's not something I have thought a great deal about, and my motorsport experience tells me if you need to find an answer on a technical query, let's suggest, go out and put it on a car, because as soon as you put it on a car, a scrutineer will challenge you and you'll get an answer very, very quickly. So let's see, but I've no intention other than to do good things for anything in connection with Porsche.
I think it's inevitable. Porsche has a duty, I suppose, to protect its own heritage and to keep a very close eye on what is going on in this world at the moment. Some extraordinary things are happening with these cars. But really what Singer, what others are doing is celebrating the history of Porsche and of the 911 in particular. And I ultimately hope that as long as it's being done well, and it is being done well by you guys, by Singer, by the best of them, I hope Porsche can celebrate in return what you're all up to. I hope ultimately they see it as a good thing. But I suppose we shall see how this evolves. Now, I just want to talk a little bit more about you, Richard, because, as I said, the company's reputation was built on competition cars, rally cars initially. And I've been lucky enough to drive one of your 911 rally cars at Walters Arena. Luckier still to have been driven by you in one of these cars. And I don't know if there is anyone else who can drive one of your cars quite like you can. You'll identify one or two perhaps, but they are elite level professional rally drivers. But you drove me around Walters in one of your cars, and it was about the most remarkable display of driving ability I've ever seen. Equally, there is a bit of footage of you on YouTube, and you won't thank me for highlighting this. You're 17 years old, very fresh-faced, full head of hair.
There's no need. Just let me stop you. There is no need.
I need to go and look. I don't even know what it is yet, but I need to know what this is.
It's fantastic. But I think it's a 17-year-old Richard Tuthill doing, I guess it's Rally GB in a Beetle.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, well, you have. That's fair enough. But I've always wanted to know this about you, Richard. You drive phenomenally well. You grew up with rallying in your blood. I just wonder why you didn't pursue a professional career. Or did you?
Well, I did. And so I'm 50 this year, so it's probably time for me to admit that I didn't get there. That story is reasonably well known, but I think I had a great crack at rallying, winning British Junior Championship. I had some great results driving for Pro Drive in their Group N Subaru, which I was at the forefront of development with. I had some great success in America, beating factory cars, and in fact, I drove with Mitsubishi and Hyundai in America as well. So I did a lot of driving, but I, like so many others, didn't get a particular break at a point where perhaps I could have done, should have done. And there's lots of reasons why, and I could talk to you for an hour as to where it got to, why it stopped. But ultimately, what I decided, which was a really difficult decision, to stop driving professionally, because I have many mates who work for me. There's not many world champions who haven't driven our cars, worked with us, or you know, I could pick up the phone to today. But it's a difficult career. It's a very, very narrow, narrow path to the top. And ultimately, for one reason or another, I didn't get there. I was a very, very good driver. I still am a reasonable driver, but I was a very good driver. I won plenty of events, and so the way I drive a 911 is unique, and that is both a good thing and a bad thing. But the 911 is a very, very specific car, and it needs driving in a certain way. And again, I've sat next to Marco Allen, Bjorn Voldegaard, Stig Blomqvist, Jimmy McRae, Colin McRae, Carlos Sainz. I've sat next to everybody in 911s, Francois Delacour, everybody. And the first thing I have to do is politely point out how to drive them, with the exception of Bjorn. With the exception of Bjorn. Yeah, he got it. He taught me.
Well, he won the Monty in one, didn't he?
Say again?
He won the Monty in one, didn't he?
He won the Monty in something like 68, I think. In
a 911.
Yeah.
So he already knew. Yeah.
But he was remarkable, remarkable full stop. But he won Safari with us in 2011, I want to say. I did Ypres Rally as his co-driver in 2004 or something, I can't remember. But he didn't left foot brake in a 911, and he had this sixth sense as to where the front axle was. It was mighty impressive. And actually, before he came to drive for us in Kenya, I took a day trip to Morocco. So we'd been rallying in Morocco, and Bjorn had been in some awful Peugeot. And on the way to the airport, we shared a car. I said, Bjorn, do you think you can still win the Safari? It looked like I'd slapped him in the face. He was so upset with what I'd said. Anyway, we arranged a test for him in Morocco to do some development work on our dampers and gearbox. And I still wasn't convinced. Bearing in mind, I'd beaten him in rallies already. So I thought, well, if I can beat him, I just need to see really where he's at, because by now he would have been 60-something. I flew to Morocco, sat in the car with him for 20 miles. I planned to be there for 3 days. I literally did a 20-mile loop, and I went straight back to the airport. And it was very clear that he could still win the rally. And in fact, he came to Kenya that year straight from intensive care. And I'm not joking. It was the start of his illness, but he looked bloody awful, to the point where Dad and I said, do we need to bring in another driver, or do I drive? It was that bad. And he got better and better and stronger throughout the rally, and won the rally, which was the first time a 911 had won the Safari Rally. So
wow.
He had an extraordinary ability to drive a 911. But other than that, it is something that needs demonstrating, and I have a certain style, which...
So hang on, just very briefly, in a sentence, how do you drive a 911? I've always wanted to know.
Okay, there's 3 phases to every corner in a 911. Aggressive, passive, aggressive.
Okay.
Ooh.
You have to be aggressive on the way in. You have to brake late. You have to get the car turned in. In the middle of the corner, you're passive. You wait. And as soon as you have traction, you're aggressive. Ooh. Every single corner is the same.
Aggressive, passive, aggressive.
It makes such sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The end. Yeah.
The end. That's it.
It's really easy.
So almost a year ago, 11 months ago, I was in the middle of Wales somewhere watching the Roger Albert Clark rally. Fantastic event. And you came through in one of your own cars, I think there's a red one.
Yeah, red one.
And we were on a downhill section, quite a tight right-hander. And you were aggressive on the brakes, hard and late. But in the passive moment, I mean, there's plenty happening because the car was arcing around in a beautiful drift. And then, there's an aggressive phase again when you stamp on the gas and away you go. But it was balletic watching your car through there. Yeah, such control, such precision. And what others were doing was sort of stabbing at the throttle, getting the thing out of balance, on and off, and just there was no smoothness
messing
there.
Around,
yeah, but you were just smooth.
That was a bad event for us. We were disappointed because we had a problem from the very beginning. But now look, it's quite a specific thing. But the passive bit's interesting. I was doing some mapping on a well-known Porsche product with some Bosch engineers, and they were working on traction control and yaw control, all sorts of other controls that none of us really want, but actually on this car you really needed it. And they were struggling, and I just said to them, look, can you just turn it all off and map a couple of laps of me driving? And the problem was that in the middle, this passive section of any corner, you are doing stuff, but a lot of the time you're actually not doing anything, you're waiting. There is a moment where you have to wait, and the computer sees nothing going on. And their problem was that when the computer saw nothing going on, it tried to help.
Yeah.
once they
Always the
understood
way,
that
isn't
is a
it?
perfectly normal phase in a 911,
Yeah.
they unlocked a secret, and they went on to create a brilliant system. But no, the nothing phase is of course there's an element of what to do, when, and how. But yeah, I've got reasonably good at it.
Yeah, you have.
And you use your left foot.
I do probably too much these days. I'm long past my best, but all the left foot does for you. The front of the 911 is very light, so if you imagine you've got your both hands on the steering wheel, you've got both butt cheeks on the seat, and you've got a right foot that's doing your throttle. So if you introduce your left foot, for me that's another piece of information that's coming up into my nervous system. So actually, it's just giving me another feeling. You've got to be careful not to overuse it, but it's certainly one way. But as I say, yeah, I can drive without my left foot, and we demonstrate it on the lake when we're driving in Sweden. There's a delay, because as you press with your right foot and you come across to the throttle, the damper is always coming back up. It's already on its way back up.
Absolutely.
So you have to be more aggressive on your braking, and that's something Bjorn demonstrated beautifully. He was so aggressive with his right foot.
Wow. And so the 911, as you said, it's a unique car, really. It's an unusual car, and it takes a particular driving style. So can you just briefly tell us what the advantages of the 911 are, of the 911 in rallying is? What are the advantages, and what are the disadvantages compared to the cars that you're up against, typically a Mark II Escort?
Yeah, always a Mark II Escort. Well, firstly, there was a problem with the drivers in there. It was Chris Meek and Petter Solberg, Oliver Solberg, who I think is about 20. That was they drove those cars spectacularly, as you'd expect. Look, we've got independent suspension and we've got more torque, so we have better traction, and we have more torque. Although the current Mark II Escort has got a staggering engine, so I can't honestly say a 911 is streets ahead of anything, but I would still put my money on if you put Chris or Oliver against each other, one in a 911 and one in a Escort, the 911 should win. But really? It's a challenge. The Escort is so forgiving, and when you're on organisers' notes, without recce, all of that good stuff, then Escort probably has an advantage. It's easier to drive, there's no doubt. I can't argue that. It's an easier car to drive. But the 911 has a bigger engine and better traction, and it has independent suspension. Therefore, it should be unbeatable.
But when you're dealing with sometimes not entirely professional full-time rally drivers, I'm guessing that because an Escort is a more forgiving car, there is a kind of confidence that you get to push it that harder, knowing that the limit is going to be kinder to you than you might want to go in a 911.
No, absolutely, that's correct. And if we take our mate Chris Harris, all of whom we're very good friends with, he came to the RAC on the same rally, and Chris is a fantastic driver. There's no question. But to go down a rally stage at any sort of speed takes a huge amount of confidence, and you're going to find that confidence in an Escort sooner than you are in a 911.
Sure.
Once you give yourself some time, the 911 will probably do you better. And then if you pick the event, for example, our most favoured event, which is the Safari Rally, they really are unbeatable because they have a reliability to them which is unrivaled. Plus the type of driving we see on marathon events, or even though the Safari has now become a sprint event, the type of roads you see there, the Escort has less of an advantage.
Tuthill is involved in plenty of circuit racing, but I know your background. Rallying's still the best, isn't it?
Well, I watched the live feed from Estoril yesterday, watching Dario Marino drive beautifully for their first time in a 2-litre Cup car. Of course, they did some testing before the event, and they're both great drivers. I have done a little bit of circuit racing in the last couple of years because I wanted to learn about it. And I really have enjoyed it. And what I will say, there is no question that anything you do on the track helps you as a rally driver, and vice versa. So you need to do everything. You need to drive cars everywhere. The best thing about rallying, bar none, is once you leave in the morning, you are on an adventure. And because of my attention span, which is fairly well known to be very short, the idea of standing at a circuit for one day is a challenge. To stand there for 3 days whilst you have practice, qualifying, and a race is a real ask. The driving itself is fantastic. Door to door in a 2-litre cup car is hard to beat. I think the one thing that I've learned to understand about the championship, which is a challenge for it, is you can't hide. So if you go to a mixed grid race, you can hide. You can say, well, the E-Type's better, or the
of course,
or the Elantra. Stick yourself in a 2-litre 911.
It's on
and
you.
Racing is ruthless. Yeah. Every single lap, your name is on a board or a computer or somewhere, and you are fast or slow.
Yeah.
And I'm not fast in a race car, so I know the feeling. And I think you get called out, and you have to be a proper grown-up to say, you know what, I'm here for a brilliant weekend, and I want to drive a car against someone else, and I want to have an amazing time. And whether I'm racing for podium position or 15th or 16th, I'm having a great time in the most extraordinary car. The 2-litre car on a track, just staggering to drive, and no power, all of that good stuff, 200 horsepower. Yeah. But it's brilliant. You have to be very, very, very good to drive those cars quickly.
Yeah, we've all seen footage on board of those cars. The way they slither around just looks beguiling.
They are brilliant things.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd love to have a go.
I did my first ever race at Le Mans in the Classic in a 2-litre FIA 911. And it was so much more forgiving. The only problem with it was it would go down the straight, weaving from side to side. So we put the
aero's not great.
We put the spare wheel back in, gave it a bit of rake, put a bit in and it was fine after that. And then actually after that, I found it really confidence inspiring. I don't know why. I just felt really, really happy in the car, and it was a great, great thing in which to learn a really daunting circuit.
Mind you, you've driven 904s though, so
yeah, but
one of them, you're a brave boy.
But I got out of the 911 into the 904, so I did it the other way around, which was absolutely the right way to do it.
Yeah. No, I think, when was that? What year was that you did Le Mans in a 2-litre car?
I did it in a 2-litre car in 10, I think. It would have been...
Okay, so if you jumped in a 2-litre cup car, which now you can always talk about, and I don't like to talk about development too much. The only areas that have really changed is we're now all at 200 horsepower. You would have driven something with 150, maybe 170. And we've refined the damping. The rest of the car is really very true to an original 911. So damping and engines. So they've come on a bit. And yes, we're running this Avon tyre with a 70 profile. So when it starts to slide, I mean, you did have 3 minutes of warning before it starts to slide. It doesn't snap. Yeah. So you can still spin them, of course you can, but they are beautiful to drive, and they're not that daunting. They're just a challenge.
Yeah. Brilliant.
We need to wrap it up there, Richard.
It's been such good fun.
Thank you for coming on. It's great to see everything that's going on at your business on the competition side, especially the road car side. It's all very exciting, and hopefully we'll get to come and have a play at some point soon.
Yeah, come and drive some cars, chaps. But thank you very much for having a chat, and thank you for your support and your encouragement.
Not at all. Not at all. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Richard. And to everyone listening, everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube to our YouTube channel. If you're just listening to this through a podcast app, follow the show. It really helps us, and we'll be back again next week.
Bye.